Hello and welcome. My name is Robert O'Byrne and today I'm at Glin Castle in County Limerick. Glin has been home to the FitzGerald family, hereditary Knights of Glin, since the 13th century, up until 10 years ago when very sadly Desmond FitzGerald, the 29th and last Knight of Glin, died. Desmond will, I'm sure, have been known to very many of you. However, today Glin is being very capably managed by Desmond's eldest daughter, Catherine FitzGerald, a landscape gardener who's talking to me about both her own work and indeed her plans for the future here at Glin. I hope you enjoy what follows. Catherine, thank you so much for letting us be here in glorious Glin on such a spectacularly beautiful day. And we're going to talk about Glin in due course.
Yeah.
But you're a landscape designer by profession. How did that come about?
Well, I suppose growing up at Glin in itself, being lucky enough to grow up with these gardens, had a big effect. And visiting Kerry Gardens with all of that subtropical Gulf Stream planting was really where it was the seed where it all started. And later, after Trinity, I did go on to study horticulture at Wisley to learn more about plants. And of course, and then I had to sort of design-wise and history-wise, I went to the Architectural Association to learn about conservation of historic gardens. So I had a lovely overview of the history of gardening, and I was very passionate about that, which has all fed into my work, and also working with designers such as Arabella Lennox-Boyd. And now, of course, I'm just on my own with my partner, Mark Lutchins.
Of course. So your time at Wisley and then the Architectural Association, that was, what sort of length of time was that?
Wisley is a 2-year apprenticeship, and it's absolutely fantastic. You go into all the departments and you really work. You're an apprentice and you do a bit of studying, but it's very horticulture based and plant
A lot
based.
of weeding.
You do all the weeding and digging and sweeping and everything else, along with everybody else. And it's a 2-year fantastic course, after which, it's not quite Q, but it's, you really do know your plants, which was always my real interest. And it was always the creating effects through planting from those early days of seeing what huge tree ferns and gunnera and next to water and moss and lichen, all of that exciting atmospheric Robinsonian wild planting was really the beginning of everything for me, rather than the more neat and tidy stuff.
Rather than the more formal.
Yeah, and later
gardens.
I see, you need structure, you need hedges, you need shapes, but really the original inspiration was that sort of very atmospheric West of Ireland Gulf Stream garden.
And we're very lucky, and we'll talk a bit about one of your forebears who was involved in creating some of those gardens in the west of Ireland. Now, you then went to work with Arabella Lennox-Boyd. Now, she may not be familiar to some of our viewers here today, so just tell me a little bit about her.
Well, she was really one of the early women landscape architects who in the 60s, 70s, who were completely professional, charged the proper fees and worked in that professional way. She had a large office after a while and has designed really probably almost hundreds of gardens around the world, won Chelsea 7 or 8, Chelsea Gold 7 or 8 times, and was a real source of inspiration for many women landscape architects. She's tough, she's just highly professional, and she had a wonderful eye, a wonderful knack of combining the wonderful soft diaphanous floaty planting, roses and so on, with the Italian structure of a strong form, which meant her gardens really last well. They really still are as good many years later than on the day she sort of finishes them.
Because she's Italian.
I think it's that structural backbone she gives to things that really, that do last. And she moves with the times as well. Her planting really, she's always soaking up the latest thoughts and movements, and she really keeps abreast of all that. So she's always got a fresh angle. So she was a real, she taught me a lot.
Yeah. And how long were you with her?
I was here for about 3 years.
Okay. And then you branched out on your own?
Yes. Then I found my partner, Mark Lutchins, who's a landscape architect. I suppose he gives me that sort of backbone of strong architectural. He's a beautiful technical draftsman, everything by hand, trained at Greenwich, and I come from the more plant angle, and also the sort of all ideas and the history and all that. But I'm very interested in the spirit of the place, and rather than rushing in, really taking it in, spending time, trying to work out what is the soul of the place, and trying to kind of work with what's there and adapt and really be sensitive to that. I think the planting, sensitive planting, can achieve a lot. I've never been one for unnecessarily sweeping things away, but sort of using what's there, but embellishing what's good, removing what doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And
Mark Lutyens, what relation is he to Lutyens?
Well, he's actually his great nephew. So his Edwin Lutyens' brother was his grandfather, and he worked in his Edwin Lutyens' office, and he did a lot of the work as well. And so it's a real direct line from that office, and he has got the most beautiful drawing technique, and it's lovely. Nowadays everything's done on the computer, and we do lots of things on the computer, but his main, when he presents of plans, they're done by hand, and you really get that sort of depth and feel for the site from that plan, much more than computer generated, I think.
Now, one of your first jobs was, in fact, a couple of your big jobs here in Ireland have been in the north of Ireland.
Yes, yeah.
So you started where?
Well, it was a friend, Randall MacDonald at Glenarm, who wanted to provide a sort of hook for getting people to come to the house, to the garden really, and to the place, and open things up a bit. So the wall garden was the ideal spot, and he'd already been working on it with the help of Nigel Marshall and others. But there was a large blank area, and it was the most wonderful opportunity for devising it. It had to be practical, not too much maintenance, and I came up with a plan which was a sort of journey through fruit to suit the wall garden, the site, and I divided into rooms, different fruit trees in different rooms, and then leading to a spiral mount where you can then view all the glens up one side and the wonderful coast of Antrim out to the sea on the other. So that sort of draws people up the garden, even if they're feeling a bit lazy. They want to get up to the mount to get the view. So it worked really well, and I think it was from there that I was very lucky to be able to work collaboratively at Hillsborough.
Well, we'll come on to Hillsborough in a second, but just to keep with Glenarm for a moment.
Yes.
One of the interesting things about it is, as well, is it had to be designed to be of interest throughout the year. A lot of gardens have moments, and one of the most common things you will hear a gardener say to you when you visit is, "Oh, you should have been here last week," or "Oh, you should come next week." You're never at the right time in a garden. But obviously, if you're opening somewhere like Glin Castle's garden to the public, there has to be something. So you had to take that into account. Yes,
I think I'm very much, I suppose, from the Wisley training and getting very clued into this succession of planting. People need to be interested all year round. You've got your winter, the bulbs, you must think about winter shrubs, and then spring, and you've got the magnolias and the crab apples and all the blossom in May, as long as so I'm very very definite about that, because people need to come and see something new, and I'm convinced that the historic house appeal, a lot of it lies with the people wanting to come back to the garden, because gardens, not only, they're always changing, as you say, seasonally, there's something different happening, autumn, the winter, autumn colour and so on, but also the sort of creative impulses of the owners or the minders, whoever's looking after it or in charge of the National Trust, that people are always changing, and it's so important that gardens do change and don't get too fossilized. I think that the head gardener, whoever it may be, mustn't feel constrained. They must be able to be imaginative within the within the spirit of the place. Being true to the history of the place. It's a sensitive, it's a difficult sort of, hard to define, but there is, I think one can deduce the step to go if you kind of listen and look.
Yes, the notion is that the garden is in a constant state of evolution. It's not a museum,
definitely.
Even if it's an historic garden.
Yes, definitely. I mean, being true to its history, of course, but having the having the freedom to experiment and try new things is really important, and that's what I think keeps gardens fresh
Yes.
and keeps wanting people to come.
Catherine, we've already mentioned in passing Hillsborough Castle in County Down, and for centuries that was the home of the Hill family, the Marquises of Downshire. And then, about 100 years ago, it passed into the ownership of the British government. And a few years ago, a further change happened when it became a historic royal palace.
Yeah.
And that's when you and your partner, Mark Lutyens, entered the picture.
Yes, we were asked to submit some ideas and designs for the many different areas around the house and further afield, further through the pleasure grounds, and also ultimately in the wall garden, which became the kind of central focus in the end. All the visitors were going to be brought through there and up to the house. So that was sort of key, and we really focused on that sort of central border and axis to bring people in with all that wonderful colour and productivity of a wall garden. So there were lots of different elements, but again we sort of spent a lot of time in the garden trying to feel what felt right. There was a sort of picturesque garden, long lost, overgrown with laurel and impenetrable with rills, little streams, and it became called the Lost Garden, which was brought back to life with lots of Robinsonian exotic planting, again because of the topography and the shelter in this little dell provided that possibility. And I think in Ireland, what does separate us from a lot of English gardens is this ability to grow a wide range of interesting trees and shrubs from all over the world, whether it be Chile, South America, South Africa, and a lot China, Japan,
Australasia,
and have
almost
links.
anywhere.
Yeah, and a lot of wonderful work is going on. But Edinburgh Botanic Garden are sending seeds from conifers in danger in the wild to places like Glenstall Abbey, where Brother Anthony is growing those conifers in this wonderful sheltered groves. This is a lot of going on. We have got this wonderful temperate climate of never too dry, always enough rain, not often, especially around the coast, not too cold. So Hillsborough, we brought that element in, and then we had all around the house had become quite, as you can imagine, in a sort of government building, it become bit stark, and not a lot of it wasn't the priority to make it a really welcoming space. So we've really tried to bring that alive, bringing planting into the terrace, a bit like at Mount Stuart, to break up that sort of feeling of a first, take away the grandiose, overbearing quality and climbers on the house, and break up put down paving instead of gravel, with lots of wonderful scented, lots of plants moving, insects. Tried to bring it all alive. I think we really felt it had gone to sleep along the way. It had sort of fossilized, and it really needs some fresh planting ideas and fresh colours, fresh structure, fresh thoughts, and that's what we've really tried to do.
Yeah, the terrace was very sterile before, and now you've broken it up, and so there's lots of little plants growing between the flags.
Yeah.
And when you tread on them, you're releasing scent
And thyme, and there's it's sort of always interesting at all times of year, and I think people have things to look at now. It's not just this, a wash with sort of reddish gravel that was very off-putting to people. And we brought water into the Jubilee parterre, so people want to go and sit by the pool and listen to the sound of the water, and lots of white and purple planting, and using plants that wouldn't have been there, before. It was sort of updating and bringing that sort of movement, scent, colour, structure, seats, bringing lots of seats in. People can sit there. It's really you want people to enjoy it and have that sort of sense of theatre, moving from one garden to the next, from the wild, the lost garden, then you come up to the more formal parterre, but it's got the soft planting within the structure. We pruned back the yews, which hadn't been pruned from before the wall, probably, and were very...
Because there's this great yew walk that leads up from the lake up to the terrace.
Everything had got so top heavy and dark, and the light wasn't coming in, and there and in the Jubilee parterre we really took the yews back a lot, and suddenly light flooded in, and we extended the planting underneath it, and kind of all kinds of possibilities, and now people are enjoying it and sitting there, and you see people really loving to be there. So it was really about bringing it back to life, keeping within the spirit of the place, and then the focus was the wall garden, productivity, wonderful, showing people what you can grow, and again within, you know, espaliered apple framework of lots of espaliered fruit, an orchard, all the traditional walled garden features really.
Yes, it's been a huge success, I think. I mean, the ambition was to encourage a lot of visitors, and I think certainly this summer that's come to pass.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing process, I
It's
think,
an
with you,
ongoing
isn't it?
process. There were so many, it's such a large site, you know, you could be, you know, so much more can they are doing.
Yeah.
Wonderful head gardener Claire and wonderful Adam in the wall garden. They'll be there for years to come, developing it in the most
Yeah.
wonderful directions.
But we're now going to turn to where we are, to Glin itself,
Yes.
which was your original inspiration, after all, for
Yes, yeah.
getting involved. And for me, one of the special qualities of Glin is the fact that there have been generations of women closely
Yes.
associated with the gardens. You know, so often we think of houses and gardens as being a male preserve, but Glin, for at least a century, if not more now, it's been very much a woman's area.
Yes, I mean, although a male preserve, but actually also it was always an area which women, having you know, had such a reduced page on which to practice things. Gardening was always something that was a huge, I think, comfort and diversion and work for women. If you think of Mrs. Delaney and the Carton, you know,
With Lady Emily.
Lady Emily,
Yeah.
and all those letters written between the sisters about projects and on the gardens and estates, the Shell House and so on. So it was a thing, you know, I see it as part of that tradition. But definitely I know most about my great-grandmother, my grandmother,
And of course your mother, your
my
wonderful
mother,
mother.
and they're all very living to me. Well, what they did, what they planted. This tree my great grandmother planted from her father, who was an avid plant collector, Lord Dunraven, the fourth Earl of Dunraven.
So tell me a little bit about your great grandmother.
Well, she was called Rachel Wyndham Quinn. Her father was a very interesting character who travelled to America a lot, collected plants and seeds. He was a politician. His father was an antiquarian who documented a lot of Ireland's old ruins, churches, and his books are very well known. So they were a cultivated family who lived at Adair Manor. So she came with a lot of that background and appreciation for buildings and plants. And her father, loved Glin because although it was only 40 minutes drive, and then it would have been longer, it had a slightly different climate. It had the Gulf Stream, and he could grow a lot of things like crinodendrons and drimys and the things which are in the garden now, which he couldn't grow at Adair. I was lucky, so lucky, to grow up with all of these awareness of all those influences in this long line of several generations of women who were sort of, you know, their pictures. I knew my grandmother, the portrait of my great grandmother. I had them in my mind's eye, and I sort of felt their presence even after they were gone. And then of course my mother is still here, living here, and still intensely interested in it all, and we're sort of carrying on what she was doing. But
what's interesting though as well is, I think, you know, we've been speaking about the spirit of the place, and in a different sense, the spirit of the place seems to, so to speak, infect successive generations. Because your mother, for example, she was a London girl after all.
Oh,
she wasn't a country girl,
Yeah.
she wasn't familiar. And yet once she came to live here in Glin...
I'm afraid Glin has this sort of strange grasp. It's sort of obsessive. You can't escape. It's got this, I don't know whether it's because of the remoteness, the intense sort of remote feeling in this garden, but it's got a great atmosphere, and I'm actually very interested in that sort of phenomenon. I think it leads into all kinds of thoughts people are having now, deep ecology, and, you know, our relation to nature is so much, you know, so much to do with the subconscious, so much deeper than I think we are aware of. And so I think gardens such as Glin and, you know, those West Coast Kerry gardens, those very atmospheric gardens, are so good for the soul and incredibly play a very important role, more now today than ever before. I mean, after COVID, look what we saw with everyone is sort of, you know, walking, being in nature. It's people need it. They see we need this. We have to protect and safeguard quiet, solid, quiet places, special magical places because it heals people. And
Yes,
you
I
know
think
that's
lockdown had that effect because people had less opportunity to travel and be on the move.
yeah,
They became much more conscious of their immediate world, and
yes,
and the subtle changes that take place in your immediate world. The way between one day and the next in spring, leaves start to appear, buds
yes.
open.
We all had time. People were looking at that, noticing that more than ever before. I think it's had a profound change
Mm,
on nearly everybody. People I work with, all say, oh, they might have not been in the country all that time and they've really seen all the seasons that they never normally did. And it's really had a change. And I think we need to, with all the development and population changes and we've got to really focus on what this side of, it's not just historic gardens, it's green spaces, it's trees,
mm,
it's wildflower. We're doing in our wildflower hill, I'm trying to introduce more species to it that it already has a lot, but everyone's trying to do that now.
yeah.
A new awareness has come. So for gardens such as Glyn, and I'm trying to open it, sections of it, to the public to be able to share it with more people, even though we have a business in the house. That means that we have to juggle a bit with that, but it's so important. I think if I ever could do that and make that work, I would
Mm.
feel like it's something that means a lot to do.
You and I have talked on other occasions about the gardens at Glyn, and I've said that to my mind it's your kind of laboratory. It's where you carry out experiments.
Yes, if I wish I had more time and money and everything, but I could try out
Don't
more
we all?
experiments. But as much as I can, it is, I've always, here you can grow magnolias so easily. I can see, I'm planting lots and dogwoods and all those wonderful things that you can grow in a place like Cornwall, the west coast of Scotland and Ireland. So and experimenting with architectural leaves and all of that, it's all can happen here. And then, especially with Irish gardens, you've got all of that bank to
Mm.
use in places like Hillsborough and wherever it is. And so
So, what
it
are
all
your
feeds.
plans for Glyn in terms of the gardens over the next couple of years?
Well,
Ideally.
I would love to. All these domains are. It's obviously always a challenge to, and it's a privilege, but also a challenge in how to manage them and keep them, make them sustainable. So I suppose while we have events and guests in the house, groups who take it and might want this sort of main garden privately for them, but when there's nothing going on, I could open the garden and also use a separate garden route, which would work with the wall garden and a little woodland walk with the grotto. And there's a few lovely features which,
Mm.
the public could be going around at the same time without impinging on this.
Yeah.
I think that this rental exclusive hire part of the
Mm.
ski the part of the
Part of the
plan.
site,
That
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
the whole thing is you have to juggle it. You have to have things working in parallel and try to keep them so that they each work, separately but in tandem.
Yeah, and I think the more access people have, as you're trying to do here at Glyn,
Mm.
to domains, historic
Yes,
domains,
yeah.
the better for the future of those
I
same
think
domains
so.
because people will appreciate them
Yeah,
more.
I think this new interest before, my parents did try with the Great Islands Gardens
Mm.
of Ireland restoration scheme, but somehow there was always a lot of evidence that, especially in a remote part of the country, there wasn't going to be the footfall
Mm.
and the ticket sales to really, you have to be very careful not to take on more than you can chew with
Mm.
maintenance and all of that. You have to keep things to a good standard. So it's always risky, but I, obviously I'm not anywhere close yet being able to open, but I'm exploring. And
Mm.
I hope that with the Wild Atlantic Way and this new interest from the general public around and everywhere, really, not
Mm.
just visitors to Ireland, that it would become a little destination of its own.
Yeah, and I think as well, you were talking about that Great Gardens restoration project, which was back about 40 years ago, back
Yeah,
in the 80s.
yeah.
Was very specific. And on
Hmm.
another talk, we were discussing this actually with Finola Reid,
Mm.
because she was involved in quite a lot of those
Yes,
gardens.
yeah.
They were very much restoring historic spaces. because there's a greater awareness of the environment now,
Mm.
it is precisely, there's more interest in things like wildflower meadows.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be too
No.
formal, pristine. It has
No.
to, in fact, there's a greater interest, I think, in gardens that do reflect the natural state,
I
the
think so. Oh,
Robinsonian
definitely.
state.
We have a little woodlandy bit. It's nothing, there's not incredible trees or anything, but if I could clear it a bit, the brambles and the nettles, I'd make a walk. I'd love to there's a whole movement called forest bathing. And I'm actually not really sure what it is, but it's the idea that you go, imagine in sort of my grandmother would just think, nonsense, what's forest bathing, what going, but actually I
Yeah.
really get it. It's sort of really switching off and going into contemplate, be quiet, listen to insects. It's something, because that sort of thing isn't, not everyone can do it,
No.
and we need it. And so, that's the sort of thing, little circuit I could make in the wood just for this, maybe plant a circle of birch, something to delineate. Small interventions can focus and, seats, place for people to sit, let them look at views. The topography itself is enough,
Yes.
with minimal new planting, really. So I suppose all these ideas are bubbling in my head, how to, things that I feel strongly about. Exactly, not just the historic part. It's much more the what people can feel, the peace they can find, the observation of nature, insects, plants, all of that, just quiet, and that leads on to another question, which is, how do we manage, if I think we wouldn't have that problem here in this faraway spot, but more and more gardens especially in England, that have this great footfall. Are you destroying the thing that you have to manage things so that with a light touch, not too, because what people want to come and they don't want to see crowds,
No, and they don't. And again, because of this almost Rousseau-esque revival of interest in romantic notion of
Yes.
nature, you want that forest bathing is precisely this notion of immersing,
Yes,
reveling.
immersing, reveling, quiet, the
Yeah.
buzz of bees.
And you do see this with certain gardens when they're open to the public, as certain houses. Excessive footfall, first of all, damages the experience for a
Yeah,
lot of people,
yeah.
but secondly damages the
Damages.
very environment that you're trying to present.
Exactly. So our garden designers and garden historians and preservation people, all of it, we had a conference that was recently Maynooth, and it was fascinating about all of those things. And then we've got all the climate change issues, like and problems with all these diseases that are coming because of our nursery system of importing, and in France, I mean, it was just extraordinary to see Vaux-le-Vicomte, all the box dying.
Exactly.
What we have, that we now will have no ash trees. We'll have to
Yeah.
think what we do in windy spots. It's Gardening is not, it can't just stay. It has to move. We have to think of new plants to use, and we want to use. There are new plants and introductions coming in all the time, and why would you not want to use? So but we want to respect and keep it true to its original impulses and feelings. So it's all of that's really interesting.
I think this is a very, to conclude on this, I think this is a very exciting, it's a very important moment with the environment, but it's also potentially a very exciting moment in country house gardens such as here.
I do, because we've got, obviously, say here you see the bones here, but as you see, we've got the wildflower meadow now, which we don't mow anymore, in the middle of this formal garden. And before, the woodlandy bit might have been just sort of rather untidy outward bit, but this might become the core, the sort of wilder outlying paths. And I think they can work really well together. It doesn't mean you have to have a stuffy formal garden and not have the forest bathing or the wildflowers. You can do both in different places, and people can enjoy that more pristine lawn experience in some places and then be off in the meadow in others. It's not an exclusive experience, not one or the other. I think both is wonderful.
I don't think you are going to be finished at Glin anytime soon.
Well, I mean, I haven't begun.
It's wonderful to hear Catherine's plans and to know there is such an exciting and dynamic future planned for Glin Castle and its gardens. This is the last in the present series of talks about Ireland's country house gardens. And an exhibition showing the walled gardens, paintings of the walled gardens by 4 artists, is due to open at the Irish Georgian Society's headquarters, the City Assembly House, on September the 23rd, and it will run for 2 months. I hope a lot of you will have an opportunity while it's running to get to see the exhibition and the paintings that are included, showing walled gardens right across Ireland. The second exhibition that's planned, which is looking at the history and evolution of the Irish Country House Garden, was also going to open this month. However, it's now been postponed until next spring, and it's due to open on May the 19th, also at the City Assembly House. And again, we very much hope that many of you will have an opportunity to see it while it runs for a couple of months after that date. In the meantime, thank you all very much for watching both today and indeed this entire series. It's been a pleasure to have shown something about Ireland's history and its gardens and the people involved in their preservation over the last few months. We look forward to seeing you in the City Assembly House for those exhibitions, as I say, in due course. And meanwhile, stay well, everybody, and thank you once again.